Welcome everybody. I can see the participants number running up, which is awesome. For those that are joining us whilst we wait for everybody else, if I could invite you to perhaps drop in the chat where you are joining from this evening. And given that the topic tonight is purpose and whether we can fulfill our life's purpose through the work that we do, it would be awesome to get a health check from our attendees this evening on how your work is fulfilling your life's purpose right now. What impact do you feel like your work is having on the world? So do you feel like perhaps it's just a tiny drop in the ocean, or are you making it rain impact in your local area or around the world? How are you feeling in terms of the impact your work is having on the world? But thank you everybody for being here. I'm really looking forward to facilitating this discussion with our wonderful panel this evening. I will let them introduce themselves very shortly, but in the meantime, my name is Stacey Lowman. I am currently living on the coast of Portugal. I've been searching for purpose through my career for the last 12 years, starting off in Canary Wharf the day that the last global financial crisis hit in 2008, and then starting up my own financial coaching business, converting my camper van and working remotely across Europe, having 2 glorious years at Escape the City, facilitating career change programs to help other people move into purpose-driven work. And I've just started a new role at a fintech company that are looking to democratize financial coaching and introduce more people to the world of sustainable investments. For those of you who haven't heard of Escape before, we are a global community of purpose-driven employers and organizations and talent seeking out purpose-driven work. A quick overview of timings this evening. So we will host the panel discussion after the introductions, and then at 8:30 we will open it to Q&A. So throughout the panel discussion, please do use the chat to engage in the conversation. If you have specific questions that you would like us to pose to the panel later this evening, please do drop those in the Q&A box, and we will come back to those later. And finally, we will be sharing a recording of the conversation tonight after the session, so you will be able to replay and share it. Okay, so let's hear from awesome panel. I'm so excited to speak to all of you. So perhaps if we can start with Ben, because you are to the right on my screen, it would be great to hear who you are, what your work purpose looks like right now, and what your take is on our question this evening of can we fulfill our life's purpose through the work that we do.
Thanks, Stacey, and hi everybody. I can see this is a global crew you've gathered here tonight. It's great to be back in the Escape house, room, school, community. I miss it. I was lucky enough to spend 5 years in the real physical Escape school and hangouts in London. So it's good to be reconnected with this brilliant community. And it's such a great question. I guess right now, my purpose is twofold. I have a startup called Rebel Book Club that I've been working on full time for the last year, where we help curious people from around the world explore and improve their reading habits and connect with each other. So we have about 1,000 members all over the world who are reading a non-fiction book every month and learning about all kinds of different themes and topics and trying to educate themselves in amongst the chaos of their lives. And my other purpose is my little tribe, my family, who I'm lucky to be locked down with. I mean that, even though we're on each other's nerves a lot of the time, because you know, I'm not lonely. I've got them, and I know a lot of people are struggling by being by themselves at the moment. So that's my purpose, is really just going between those two things and not getting distracted. Although, as Skye knows, and you know, Stacey, being positively distracted is one of my loves in life that often leads to purposeful things. Just thinking about that, you've asked, I'd go back to the moment where it sort of surfaced for me, at least consciously in terms of careers. And I was in the classic privileged position of being at one of these pizza and beer nights at university, at college, where they sort of say, you know, a top 100 company comes and plies you with pizza and then says, by the way, come and apply for a job here. I remember being in a queue registering to apply for this graduate job, and I was there with my friends from uni, and there's my friend who studies Middle Eastern studies, my friend who studies business, and my friend who's studying social sciences, and I'm like, hang on a second, this company we're queuing up for, these graduate jobs would look well paid, and we've heard about that a lot tonight, but they're nothing to do with what we're studying here, and they don't seem much to do with what we're all interested in or care about at the moment. And I remember a friend turning to me and saying, no, and this is what we do. This is how it works. We go get this job. We may not feel purposeful in our work, but we do it. We're lucky to be here. We take the job, and then that's it, and we work it out from there. And I was really disillusioned. I walked away, drank all the free beer I could, and as an idealistic, naive, maybe an arrogant student, I said, no, I'm going to do it differently. And I went and followed projects that I was really interested in. And like many people who have had moments of feeling slightly lost, I went and hit the roads. So I traveled the world and found an exciting, adventurous, purposeful life that way. And so that's where it began for me.
Thanks, Ben. What an introduction. Tom, let's hear from you.
Well, I'm not an expert on much. I guess I'll just relay my own sort of personal brand story, because I think the pursuit of purpose is about one's personal brand journey. I'll revert back to when I started off in advertising as a creative in Canada. That's where I'm from. I was working on Snuggle fabric softener and Diet Coke and beer brands and all of that type of thing. So I do like to kind of apply a brand triangle to one's personal brand story about what you do and the functional aspects about the skill set that you're gathering. And then there's how you do it, your own kind of personal brand that you're setting out as far as how you do things and your personality and all that. And then at the top of that is the why question. That's going from functional to emotional to then spiritual alignment. And that's that question of why am I doing the things I do? That took me from advertising to Hong Kong and then switching to PR with the big nasty dark arts agencies, doing a couple of pretty interesting projects there. And then back in-house communications positions, and then eventually landing as a director of marketing communications in Blab UK here. So of course that's about harnessing business as a force for good in the world. And I think really I might be a bit contrarian, but I think it's not, my purpose isn't about doing good in the world, but my purpose is more about kind of sharing the knowledge and kind of mentoring the next generation of talent to change the world, because I'm too old to do anything. So it's not up to me anymore. And I think I've gone through a coaching process. When I was living in Brooklyn for a while, I was unable to work because of my visa situation. I thought, what am I going to do here? And I went through that. And after a long period of self-reflection and coaching, I came to this statement that says that I'm basically a showman at heart. I'm a performer at heart. But at this point, it's now about shining the light on other people. And that's kind of where I get my fulfillment. And the purpose is really about sort of not me being the center of attention anymore, but rather having the next generation, the people I work with, the people who work for me, and the people that I learn from as being the real kind of fulfillment in the job that I do right now. So that's my story in a nutshell. Sorry to disappoint you, Stacey.
No, we love Contrarian here at Escape, and already hearing some really interesting and different perspectives on our theme tonight. So thank you, Tom. Next up, we've got Charlotte, recently published author. Hi, Charlotte.
Hi, everyone. So exciting to be in a room, albeit virtually, with so many of you. So I'm going to one-up Tom, or I'm going to try to. I also started out in advertising, as I think a lot of disillusioned people in the world of business and the intersection of purpose do. But I was selling something a little less purposeful than maybe even detergent. I was trying to sell chocolate bars to women who want to lose weight. That was my brief. After 5 years of working in advertising and feeling very disillusioned, my friend and I had this opportunity to help a homeless guy. Long story, we didn't help him. We felt incredibly guilty about it. And that sent us on this journey of launching a nonprofit that would help over 50,000 homeless people in the next few years. And so I've always worked in parallel tracks in advertising and strategy consulting, both in London, San Francisco, LA, the Middle East, and Mexico, alongside doing a lot of purpose projects. Crack and Cider was something that we initially launched to help the homeless, but I've run multiple other purpose projects in my spare time alongside day jobs. And then I most recently just published my book in January, which I'm very excited about, which helps people start their own purpose projects. And it explores this idea that we don't necessarily have to fulfill our life's purpose in our 9-to-5s to live meaningful lives.
Awesome, fascinating, thank you. And last but by no means least, hello Skye.
Hi everyone, I've already seen some people I know joining, so hi everybody, thanks for being here. I am Skye, I am the CEO of Escape. I've been at Escape for almost 6 years. I have had the pleasure of working alongside Ben, running programs, helping people find their purpose, start purposeful businesses, start all kinds of things. I started my career in politics. So I was one of those kids who would say, if people said, what do you want for Christmas? I would say world peace. I was a very sensitive and aware person when I was a kid, and I was looking for the greatest opportunity to have the biggest impact on the biggest number of people. And I thought policy and politics would be the best way of doing that. So I studied politics and policy for about 6 years, worked in think tanks, worked in policy, realized how hard it is to make policies that are adopted by government, and became a little bit disillusioned with it, although I still am very passionate about it, and joined Escape, helping people to live better lives in a more tangible way than I was doing before. I've always been very purpose driven. I've always been somebody who believes very strongly that if we spend however many thousands of hours at work, we should be doing something that positively impacts the world. I believe that we vote with our time, and most of our time is spent at work. And that's always been kind of my belief system about purpose and work. And I'm still evolving and trying to be purposeful in lots of different ways, but I'm excited about this evening because I think everybody's got a very different perspective on what purpose has to look like in your life and career. So I'm just happy to be here and grateful to be talking to all of these amazing people about it too.
Great, thank you, Skye. Such rich introductions and thought-provoking ideas from all of you already. Perhaps to start the discussion, let's acknowledge that we are in a pandemic and we have all been in various degrees of lockdown for a long time now. And I think the pandemic has obviously triggered a lot of us to rethink what purpose means and the purpose and meaning of our work in the world and the contribution it makes to the world. For some of us, we've seen renewed purpose in the work that we do. For others, it's been a catalyst of change and to look for other work that brings us more purpose for various reasons. So perhaps I'd like to hear from some of you on why now is a pertinent and important time to be posing this question of why it matters that our work should be purpose-driven.
Our narrative at Blab UK and the B Corp movement is that the pandemic, or the convergence of Black Lives Matter, the pandemic, climate change, is basically highlighting all of the flaws in our various operating systems. And it's also just exposing the cracks, recognizing the social disparity, the economic inequality, what's considered essential, et cetera, et cetera. So it's basically shone a light on the problems that we've been addressing for many, many years. And now hopefully it can apply a little bit more urgency and the recognition that certainly most people, 3/4 of the people in the UK, think that the system is broken and needs to be fixed. Something has to happen because we cannot go back to the new normal, if you will. There needs to be some more fundamental change. So it has shone a light onto the issues that we've all been working on.
I totally agree with that, Tom. And I think two particular things really come up for me when you ask that question about what does purpose mean in the context of where we're at today. So on the first hand, I don't know whether people in the audience, or maybe Ben, you've involved this in Rebel Book Club, have read When the Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. In his book, he's talking about trauma and the way that trauma is embodied in us and how that manifests in our day-to-day lives. And he tells this incredible story about how he was in Puerto Rico after the hurricanes and witnessed that when he got there, there were people rushing to help, cleaning up the rubble in the housing and really getting to work in response to the stress that was accumulating in the atmosphere as a result of that travesty. And then he said that FEMA came in and told everyone to stop, to stay at home, to stop interfering, that aid was on its way, and that people shouldn't get involved in helping to address the issues that have been created. And he said what he noticed when this happened, what he noticed when people who were experiencing stress were told to stay at home and do nothing, was when the stress calcified into trauma. And what he's found is that from a psychological and biological level, when we experience stress, cortisol is released, and cortisol is a fascinating and incredible hormone and has an amazing impact on our bodies in the fact that it drives us into action, and we need to act as a result of stress. So what I'm seeing right now, and have been for the last year, that I think is very worrying from a neurobiological perspective, is that we have an enormous amount of stress, and our biology is telling us that we need to act and do something to help, but we're being told to sit at home and do nothing. And that is when stress actually calcifies into trauma and has extremely damaging long-term effects. So I think all of those things, Tom, that you said that we're seeing right now, the racial reckoning, the environmental collapse, the collapse of our healthcare systems, economy, etc., it's imperative that when we feel stressed about these things, we don't shy away from them, we don't look in the other direction, but we actually act, because it will protect you from having all of these really challenging situations calcify into something that has a negative effect in the long term.
That's prompted a couple of thoughts for me. The first one is this idea of where do we find our purpose? Can we find it through external sources and external events like BLM, like the pandemic, like the environmental crisis? Or is it something that's internally inherent, like within us, that we just need to uncover somehow? So let's start with that one. Any thoughts on where our purpose comes from? Is it already within us? Can we cultivate it?
If I jump in that, Stacey, and I'm also just taking in what Tom and Charlotte just said. It's fascinating. We read Dr. Gabor Mate, who's this amazing doctor who studies trauma and how it can be passed on generationally. And it shifted my thinking a lot about pain and suffering and how we work and live. It's such an important side of this, the science of what happens when people are stressed. I'm always fascinated by watching what happens to people as well as the data, but what happens to individuals. There's two stories that are in my mind right now of two people who live very public lives, one right at the end of his life, one at the start of her career, but both appear to be living or have lived incredible purposeful careers. We'll start with the younger one, a lady called Grace Beverly, who was age 17, 18, was like, I need to get all my ideas out into the world. I want to be a model. I want to go to college and study. I want to start 10 businesses. But she fell into the influencer space, and she ended up traveling and taking pictures and putting them on Instagram, selling them for a lot of money. And that we know about the influencers, and they have a certain reputation, but we also know it's a very successful career for those that do it. And if you listen to her story, she's only 23 now, and she's since gone to Oxford University and now runs 2 multi-million-pound businesses, both very purposeful. She says, I wasn't fulfilled when I was doing my Instagram thing, which may not be surprising, but it's interesting that she had that level of maturity to sort of foresee a quarter life or midlife crisis coming up when all this fame and fortune turned into something else. She said, the thing I really missed when I had the dream job when I was 20 years old was a routine, a real problem to try and solve, and a group of people to work with that I cared about. So she's come back, gone to university and set up 2 successful businesses. This is an exceptional human being on many levels, but the fact that she recognized early on, when she was already successful in pure capitalist terms, she then went off and pivoted, as we say in the career change world, made that change and has set up these businesses. She talks about, I love the mundane. I love the grind. I love the hustle. I love all of that. That's who she is. So she seems to have connected to her true work and purpose. And then the other one, which is almost the other way around, is this old fella who's sitting up here, a guy called David Attenborough, whose story is on Netflix, who we've seen on our screens or heard his voice for decades now, narrating the wonders of our world. And his story, which he tells through this brilliant book and documentary, A Life on Our Planet, is about, from 1937, how he fell into a job. It was an accident that he ended up presenting these documentary series about wildlife. He was in the back of the production room, kind of telling, oh, that shot. And then the presenter was ill. He jumped in and he was great at it. And then over time, and it's taken 6 decades, remember, over time, he's become more and more driven, not just to show the beauty of the world, but to start to show its problems. And some could even argue, in the hardcore environmental corner, he didn't show it early enough, but maybe the realization wasn't there for him until the last 10 years or so. And now in his mid-90s, he's saying from a very strong influential position, we have to change. And you watch the documentary, it's quite emotional, which you never see. We have to change the way we make things, the way we live, the way we care for nature, which we're part of and we're destroying. When I see those two stories side by side in very different ways, they remind me of what the beauty of living a purposeful life. However, it's not necessarily a formula. It's more around, we've learned a lot at the Escape School over the years, following your curiosities, staying close to people that you share values with, trying to do the small things every day and so on. But it's not a linear path. That's the thing that always comes back to me. The mistake that I think we hear a lot of people say, and I've maybe done it as well, is when you look back and you reflect, the Steve Jobs join the dots up speech. Oh yeah, it's very obvious to me, but I don't think it is. It's a good story to tell, like, oh yeah, the thread running through my career is this, or my life is this. Well, that's true. That's a part of your character and a part of who you are and the people you met. But it's really a simplistic version of that. And it makes a good story, but it's not. It's much more complex and nuanced. That's why I think it's good to actually just say, well, this worked then, this kind of is interesting and we should do more of that. But it changes all the time in my experience so far.
I might be connecting the dots looking back here, but I was thinking when you were telling the stories about Grace Beverley and Attenborough, what does connect the two? And this also relates back to the point about why this is such a pertinent issue right now, is that for me, it's about being able to listen to what's within and being really true to yourself and being able to respond to the environment, to recognize how your internal world is responding to that environment. Something I think incredibly powerful right now is we've had so many of the distractors, the distraction from our internal world taken away, which gives us an amazing opportunity to actually listen to what's within, because there's less speaking, there's less to be distracted by. That does give me hope that we will be able to identify what's purposeful to us because we have less to distract us. And to me, to answer your question, Stacey, the answer is within, in response to the external world, of course.
Lots of people have joined this evening because they want to lead a purpose-driven life and purpose-driven career, but they perhaps don't know what that purpose is. What advice would you give for how they do listen inwards and find what their purpose is? Some of you have spoken about projects that you do to test some of your assumptions around whether things are purposeful and meaningful to you. So for those listening who want purpose and don't yet know what that looks like to them, how might they go about finding it?
Not to get pedantic, is it purpose or is it alignment with your work? Because my purpose in life might be to be a good father, or be a great musician or something like that. And if I happen to find something like that through work, that's great. But I always find that the terminology or the disconnect between purpose and then fulfillment, which is the word that comes up as well. And I think back to my brother. I mean, I discovered his diary when he was 12. He said, when he was 12, I'm going to be a doctor. And he went and became a doctor. But is he fulfilled? Does he feel happy? Does he feel like, is there something else? Does he have any regrets about not trying to be a photographer or something else? So that to me is a curious kind of, not to be semantic about it, but just interesting in terms of the question of why. Why do we do the things we do? My perspective is, don't think that you can always achieve your purpose through work. Work might be a means to another end. There are plenty of stories of famous poets and writers who had to take menial jobs just so they can get on with their craft at night. So I think it's, and I don't mean to be contrarian, but I think it's a lovely kind of liberal middle class perspective to seek to find purpose through work, whereas 98% of the population just work to get by, put food on the table and heat their homes.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a good point, Tom. This is a challenge that I have been on the receiving end of many times at Escape, really, of people saying, well, isn't this just for white middle class? And here we are, all white middle class people talking about this as well on the panel. But this idea that purpose is somehow for elites, because in a hierarchy of needs, of course, we have to meet certain needs before you have the space to be able to think about purpose beyond yourself and purpose beyond your day-to-day and making that work. For me, purpose is split in a couple of ways. And one is doing something really purposeful that you think is purposeful in your work and maybe has a greater purpose or a greater impact working on things like climate change or any of those issues that we really care about. And then there's also something that's more like meaning making. So you can make something meaningful. Something that I'm doing that's very mundane day to day can be meaningful to me because of the outcome of it. It means that I can feed my family, or I can acquire skills, or it means that I can go home and feel satisfied at night. We can make meaning out of a lot of things if we have that mindset, or we think about it. You know, I think of I don't remember what it is, so I'm going to misquote it, but it was in NASA. There was a guy in NASA who was working as a janitor. And JFK said, "What do you do here?" And he said, "Well, I'm helping people to get to the moon. I'm helping people to go to space." And it's the meaning is in something that's greater than maybe what you do in your day, but how you are contributing to something that's meaningful to you as well. So I think that there's a lot around that. This is a slight diversion, but Stacey, your question about finding purpose, or how do you find that if that is something that you want to do with your career and you have the space to think about it? You're just exploring, try stuff and be open to being wrong and open to getting it wrong. Your brother, Tom, who said he wanted to be a doctor, what if he had found out 10 years in that he hated it? Would he think, "Oh, well, I've already gone so far down this path, I can't do anything else. All I know is being a doctor"? And I think part of it is being open to just trying stuff out and seeing how you get on. I love Charlotte's approach of projects, and Ben, the happy distractions is another of seeing actually where things lead you. You have to find it, and sometimes it's through really roundabout, weird ways. I think coronavirus has brought this up. People realize what's important to them, whether it's their family or they experience death around them. It brings up a lot of this looking for something else.
What I think makes a lot of sense to me is this idea that you have, we used to call it, I think Anna's just said it here, we used to call it volunteering. You have your job and then you go and volunteer outside, and a lot of purpose and meaning was attached to that, or doing your bit for going to the moon, helping solve whatever problem, the problem of homelessness or whatever it was that you cared about. But the interesting thing about today, and the B Corp are leading the charge with this, is that there's a blurring of lines, and maybe there's a better model rather than just saying, okay, companies over here, organize over here, create wealth, but also create social and environmental problems, and then charities over here try and clean it up, and government is somewhere in between. Whereas actually there's a blurring here, and we're seeing new economic models. And, we're a big fan at Rebel Book Club of donut economics, which is this idea. If you think about a donut, there's a sweet spot where everyone has got the basic social needs are served, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if self-actualization or purposeful career is in those basic needs, but the ones including social justice. And then the outside the donut is our environmental or sort of natural resource limits. And we should design every decision and every organization, every part of society to be in the sweet spot of the donut. And it makes complete sense, but we're still a million miles from there. We're talking about green jobs and green growth and so on, but that doesn't necessarily get us to the point of everyone living in that donut. The thing that always excites me or gives me energy is thinking about all these brilliant people and organizations that are trying to make things a bit better, whether it's trying to get to the moon, whether it's this B Corp movement. And I spoke to Deepak last week, who's an escapee who we met 5 years ago now. And if I can share his story briefly, because I think it's a good one for tonight. So Deepak came on the Escape Startups course, which we were leading. And I said, "Deepak, what are you trying to do? What's your idea? What are you trying to sort out?" He's like, "Oh, I want to teach British Indian men to get fit and healthy because their diet's terrible." I was like, okay, cool. So off he went, got his Facebook video going. He came in after the weekend. He had 1,500 followers. We were like, "Deepak, you're up and running, you're away." And then 2 weeks later, he wasn't so happy. I was like, "Deepak, what's up? You built a community overnight of people." He's like, "Well, one, I'm just doing press-ups in my bedroom and putting it on the Facebook. It feels weird. And two, I don't know how this is going to make any money. And three, my wife, Emily, needs help with her work." I said, "Well, what's your wife doing?" "Well, every Saturday morning, Emily goes to the local market in East London, and she buys up all the leftover wonky fruit and veg from the market, the misshapen stuff. And then she goes to the local restaurants and she sells it to them." I was like, "What's she doing that for?" She's like, "Well, she cares about food waste. It's a big issue." And he told me all about it. And he was really passionate, and she needs help. And I said, "Okay, do you want to help her?" He's like, "I don't know. I want to do this other thing, but she needs my." I said, "Okay, well, maybe go and help her." And he kind of reluctantly went off and started helping Emily, his wife. And it was the best decision he ever made. So Oddbox, their company, now sells 55,000 boxes of wonky fruit and veg a week. They're one of the kind of great B Corp startup stories. And he's just trying to figure out like how they scale next. But if you said to Deepak, like, was your purpose to try and solve the food waste problem, which is a huge global problem, by the way? He'd be like, no, I wanted to do something different. But he's fallen into it. He's lucky, you know, his wife took the lead and he followed her. And now he's driven and he's taken all his energy and put it into that. So that's what I love, is when you see people who kind of often stumble into it and have gone, okay. And I think we talk about it a lot at Escape. There's kind of things in your wing mirror which aren't obvious. They're like slow hunches. It's when you find out you're actually in love with your best mate, right? It's like, oh, it was always there. The answer was always there. So it's what has always felt good? What have I always seemed to attract? What's been the magnet thing in my life? And then exploring that more rather than going and trying to challenge yourself to explore everything. So yeah, Deepak, I always think of like stumbling upon purpose. I think of Deepak.
I want to just note one particular thing that often comes up in conversations around purpose. And this idea of the pyramid or Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or that there are some base level needs that need to be met before we can fulfill purpose or find purpose. And I think that that's actually very troubling and a little bit like unfair, because to me, from a biological perspective, purpose, we all have the same purpose at the end of the day. Purpose is about the maintenance and betterment of human life, or life more broadly. Every single person right at the get-go is necessitated to experience a sense of purpose. Where we get mixed up and where we feel as if purpose is something that's at the top of a pyramid and people feel like it's this illusory goal to be pursued and it's off in the distance, is incorrect, because purpose isn't an object to be attained. It's actually a verb. It's an action. It's something that we do every day. And so I think that it can be more helpful, rather than thinking about how do we find our purpose and that one day I will reach that goal. One day I will transcend to the top of this pyramid and live a purposeful life. I think it's more about recognizing where in our current lives, and kind of to your point, Ben, about having those slow hunches or seeing what's already there, recognizing where in our current lives do we feel purposeful? So less about finding purpose, more about feeling purposeful, and the verb of purpose, of doing things that are purposeful, and pay attention to those things and practice them. I think purpose should be a practice, and it's not something that's off in the distance.
I was wondering where it fits in though with, I remember from the branding days and you go up the laddering process, there's this notion of belonging, which is very important to human beings, that you're part of something, you're part of a tribe. And I'm wondering whether we're at a point now in history that's representative of one of those noble, higher, important, urgent causes. And I can think back the Spanish Civil War, where people from all around the world went to fight fascism, the civil rights movement, now in terms of where we are with the Green Revolution. And there will be those who will glom onto it just because it happens to be the movement of the decade. I went to fight Franco because I was bored. It was in the middle of a depression. I had nothing to do. I marched for civil rights because I wanted to meet girls. There's all sorts of green jobs out there, or I can basically get a job with a pretty cool NGO if I apply my skills to do that. So I think there are the bigger societal seismic shifts that are happening that happen to kind of capture our imagination, and people get attracted to that. And we'll see what happens. Or if you treat it like this is another industrial revolution, where people will fall by the wayside if they do not keep up with technology, if they, fight the fact that Rust Belt jobs are moving quickly, that manufacturing is moving overseas, the disaffected in society who are, not willing to train, not willing to reinvent themselves if they have that opportunity. So these are big global forces at work here that I think we can't just ignore.
You guys are making my job so easy tonight from just such interesting anecdotes and insights. So there's two of you on the panel, Charlotte and Ben, tonight, who have gone down a solopreneur route, designed projects that have become financially sustainable, and your own small businesses and projects. And then we've got Tom and Skye, who are working for organizations and are very closely aligned to a lot of organizations who are doing purpose-driven work in the world. So I'm interested to hear your views on the role of the individual versus organizations in creating purposeful work and meaning for themselves and then the organization's ecosystems and communities. Perhaps Tom or Skye, if you have some nice examples of organizations who are providing meaning and purpose for their employees.
Go ahead, Skye.
Mm.
I'll talk about dairy farmers in a minute.
Gosh, there's so many. We are doing our Escape 100, which is 100 companies who are hopefully creating purpose for their employees and in the world. That's the goal. But I think, where does it lie? I think it has to be both. I think we all have to be self-aware to some extent of what is meaningful to us and what does purpose look like in my job. Because for me, it might be, I need to see the impact of the work I do. I have to be able to see what I do makes a difference in some way. And for Stacey, it might be, you need to have the space to create new things. And that for you is really important. I think that there is a responsibility for us as employees to think, right, what does that look like for me? And be able to communicate that with your employer and say, how can I bring this out in my work? How can I contribute? Being aware that your work isn't probably going to tick all of your boxes as well. I care about 1,000 different causes. I couldn't expect Escape to tick all of my boxes. I've got to find some of that elsewhere. As an employer, thinking about how do we make this a springboard for our employees to do stuff that's really meaningful for them in the future, at Escape, when they leave Escape. I think this organizational parent-child dynamic that happens often, of the people at the top, they're the parents, they have to decide how it's going to go, and we're all just along for the ride. I don't think that's quite right. I think the pandemic is changing that slightly, maybe because people are more distributed in some professions where people are working remotely. But I feel we have to shift to this kind of collaborative way of working rather than it being one person's responsibility, because I see a lot of people who are upset in their work, but what are they doing to improve it? How are they creating those conversations or creating the space for those conversations at work? So I think it's a joint responsibility, and there are a lot of employers who are doing this. So many people are doing interesting things in this space. So I think it's happening more and more.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely incumbent upon the employer or the organization to create that alignment. First of all, where are we going as an organization, and you fit, et cetera, typical corporate communication stuff. But I think, and I've had this conversation, is look, all we have to offer you is the work. That's all we have. You might be in a unionized shop. We cannot offer you more money. There are pay bands. We cannot do that, but we have the work. And it's our job to keep you stimulated, to keep you learning, et cetera, et cetera. The example I had was in 1999 when I joined DuPont in Canada. And DuPont was running massive, big nylon production facilities, giant petrochemical plants, et cetera, et cetera. And this was in a place called Kingston, Ontario, which was in sort of the dairy heartland of Canada. So they hire all the dairy farmers, come there for part-time work and stuff like this. And these are people who can tinker with machinery and run their tractors and milk cows and run complicated agricultural operations. And there was a situation, well, the machine's broken down, so what are we going to do? Well, we've got to wait for the mechanic to come and fix it. And meanwhile, these are people who work there that can fix any part of a tractor, can run complex machinery, et cetera, et cetera. They were completely alienated from the work. And finally, they reject their whole HR system to say, no, we'll teach you how to do it. You can basically run this entire operation from top to bottom by yourself. We are empowering you through learning and skills to basically find meaning in your work, because you are guys who like to tinker, you like to get your hands dirty, you want to have a sense of accomplishment at the end of the day. So that's a really, really fundamental definition of purpose. But at least these guys weren't sitting around smoking cigarettes waiting for the mechanic to come and fix something and losing productivity, et cetera, et cetera. But that stuck with me forever. You're in a union, we can't offer you more money, all we have is the work. And that's incumbent upon the employer to provide that. Mm. As well as clear definition in terms of where you're going. The JFK janitor analogy is perfect. This is where you fit in.
Mm. If we instead take the assumption that the responsibility is on the individual to live more purposefully every day, I really like the idea of a purposeful diary in some way. I was listening to Jim Collins, who wrote Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0 and various other books on the Tim Ferriss show the other week, and he scores every day just with like a -1, 0, or 1 as to how creative and purposeful he felt that day. And he's been doing that every single day for decades and looking for patterns as to, okay, what's happening on the days where I'm a 1 and what's happening on the days I'm a -1, and how can I adjust that? And I'm definitely going to hold this question tomorrow of what would a purposeful diary look like for me? How do I want to track that? Perhaps Ben or Charlotte, what other advice would you have for people tomorrow who want to take it on themselves and hold that responsibility for how they can live more purposefully going forward?
My thoughts and feelings have evolved slightly on the matter, but I'm going to explain what the book presents as a solution to this. And it's based on my own experience of what I've done in my life, and that's to start a purpose project. And the first step to doing that is, I love this quote from Glennon Doyle: "A world changer's work begins with a broken heart." Going back to so much of what we've been talking about looking within and noticing what you respond to and what feels purposeful in your day-to-day, recognizing what in your environment truly breaks your heart more than anything else. There are so many problems that we can address in this world, but there'll be something more than everything else. And maybe you feel like that frustration is slightly irrational compared to other things, but that's really the place for me to start with thinking about what a solution looks like. And then, I mean, you could look at my book, or I can give you free access to the workbook. And it takes you through step by step. How do you turn that problem into a solution that actually affects change, is measurable, and is successful? The process of doing that not only directly impacts the problem that you're trying to solve, but to me, the most profound aspect of doing a purpose project is that you start to understand more about yourself and what it means to be purposeful in your day-to-day life. And I think that's been remarkable. And it's something that I don't think I could have accomplished while working for someone else. Although I will say that one of the things that I had to really come to terms with in writing this book and talking about it a lot is that I think it's still important that we find meaning in our life's work. I don't think that the meaning of our lives should be fulfilled by our jobs, but I think it's really important that whatever job we do, we look for where meaning might exist within that, because otherwise we'll be really depressed, and that's not good for anyone.
I really love that idea of going for a deep personal pain point to figure out how to find a purposeful way forward. It makes a lot of sense, and actually it mimics the sort of what I've learned about entrepreneurship and what we taught a lot at the Escape School, which is, what's the problem you're solving here? What's the pain point? And often we go, well, no, it's more joyful. And you could say, yes, of course, you can build a project that's based around making someone's life more joyful. And there are plenty of successful organizations like that. And Rebel Book Club, we're trying to do that. It's not necessarily a deep pain point, helping people accelerate their non-fiction reading habits, but it leads to all sorts of interesting outcomes. But really successful or fast-growing businesses at the start that are easy to communicate tap into that pain. And look at the vaccines right now. They're being bought up quite quickly, so they're solving a real problem. That's always good, is to look for the pain. The thing that I've learned and I've tried to practice a lot is sharing. So not in necessarily the early Grace Beverley model of Instagram influencer, but literally your whole body and life out there online, but it works for some people. I'm not sure it works for most humans, but sharing how you feel as you are in the chat here, as we are in the room here. And that's hard, I think, for a lot of people. We're lucky we all got ourselves into positions where it comes reasonably naturally, or we get dragged along to do things like this. And so I think it's putting yourself into positions where you have no choice but to join in. A really obvious, simple trend and example right now is Clubhouse, right? This is the social network that everyone is talking about. It's the next one. We can be cynical about it, right? It's easy to be cynical about social media and social networking because we've seen the cycle of them over and over again. And if you spend 10 minutes on Clubhouse, if you get an invite, it makes us all feel good, right? Brilliant business model. If you spend 10 minutes on there without really exploring it properly, you could easily come away and go, it's a bunch of people patting themselves on the back, privileged people. Only iPhone users can get on it anyway. It's a super elite community. However, the thing to ask yourself in that situation, and this is what we ask about each book we read at Rebel Book Club, is not what's wrong with it, but what's interesting about it, what's different about it, what's surprising about it, who in here is worth connecting with. And so on Clubhouse, for example, I'm spending about half an hour a day on there because I genuinely think it's a really interesting new format of bringing people together online to create networks, to learn, to do something new and different and purposeful. And through it, searching the streams, connecting with people, inviting people in. And it is a different kind of conversation. One, you don't have to organize an event like this and get all these people together. You can just literally start it. It's easy just to make things happen. These are the kind of examples when I speak to people, and also I remind myself, is when you're feeling stuck or not aligned, or as I definitely do many times over during the working week. And I'm thinking, hang on, why am I feeling like energized or purposeful or driven right now? And it's because I didn't sleep properly, or I'm worried I've got financial anxiety, or the family, or a global pandemic, the end of the world, all these other things that are sitting there. And it happens all the time. I always go back to like, oh, well, what's the fun stuff here? Who can I connect with today? What's going on? What's exciting? What's different? And when I follow those things, I get the energy again. So for me, the question I'm often trying to answer, as well as like, what's the problem I want to solve? Where's the pain that can really drive action? I also want to be drawn to things that give energy, that give good energy, whether that's individuals or projects. Solving food waste, I connected with Sasha from Olio, who I think they're a B Corp as well, but they are trying to solve the problem with food waste differently to Oddbox, but through an app where people share leftover food in their communities, and many more things besides now. And they've got 3 million people on their app now, and it's great. I'm always like, wow, look at what they're doing. For every bad news headline, there are 100 great news stories going on. So it's constantly, it's staying close to those things that I think is hard to do, because they're not necessarily easy to access all the time. But the upside of social media is you make it work for yourself. You follow the people, the escapees, and the authors like Charlotte and so on, who are every day sharing tools and learnings, and it builds and builds and builds. And it's the marginal gains thing, as James Clear talks about so beautifully. Stay close to what makes you feel good and gives you that alignment. And when you're in your dips, they will pull you forward.
But so Ben, you're talking about, you seem to kind of plant this theme of an entrepreneurial spirit, like solving a problem or the thrill you get from cracking that type of thing. Is that adding an element of judgmentalism, whereby you could have said that Charlotte's project of selling chocolate bars to women who wanted to lose weight is a fascinating problem, but it doesn't really necessarily, meet the criteria of what we would call purpose-led or purposeful business?
Yeah, great question. And I've worked with through Escape and elsewhere with people when you go, hold on a second, do we need another X type of snack bar in the fast moving consumer goods market? And I can help you get this out there, but do we really need it? And this has been an evolution for me. You say, well, hold on, is this really going to help this person? A really good quick example from the Escape School. Jamie came to Escape. This is really like years ago, before we had a curriculum, but people came anyway. He had this idea for selling. He just wanted to start something. That was his dream. I just want to start. I want to create. I want to do something entrepreneurial. And he ended up selling loads and loads of pink rosé. And he called it Guns and Rosé. So he did this fun bit of branding on it. And he shipped a lot of wine. And he learned about that process. But ultimately, it didn't make any money and so on. Jamie came back a few years later and retold his story, and he built this really successful creative film production company, which we then hired to help us with a bunch of videos. You could see he was aligned to doing something that was purposeful, helping others fulfill their own, like create their own stories and so on. And without the Guns and Rosé journey or episode, great as name as it is, it's like an Alan Partridge episode. It's not just a good name that gets you a TV show. He needed to go through that to get the armor on, to like learn that, to harden his skills. So the question, I guess, that's interesting, and I don't know the answer, is what do we all need to go through in order to learn the tools of the trade, in order to then go, actually, this is what I really am building towards, or I could do. And are we doing damage in that process? And if we're not, then it's measuring that sort of impact, isn't it? Which is what's hard.
I think we are going to open the floor to questions from our attendees tonight. So if you do have any questions for the panel, please do drop them in the Q&A box. Perhaps whilst we're seeing some of those come through, Skye, would you like to tell us about our book giveaway that was inspired by our panel discussion this evening?
Yeah, of course. I think what's interesting is that each of us on the panel and as individuals have very different perspectives on what purpose means. And I find that really interesting. I'm going to let each person just say what book you chose for the book giveaway. And we're going to run it through Instagram. So we're going to give them away and we'll send them to you. And I've already ordered them and they're all coming and we'll send them to you. But does each person just want to share what book you chose and why you chose that around the topic of purpose?
I was like, there's no way I can stick to one.
Yeah.
I have 3 more really good ones here, which I'll just recommend anyway. Be More Pirate by Sam Conniff, I love because it's a fun book about purpose. It's not like a lot of books which are very sort of, here is the framework and so on. But this is a guy who grew up in the same school as Stormzy, but with a lot more privilege, and ended up going off and trying to help more people like Stormzy navigate challenging life in South London and create social and purposeful businesses, social enterprises, and so on. And so Be More Pirate is his story of how pirates, in fact, unlike their classical story, the Golden Age of Pirates, are the original purpose-driven sort of leaders and entrepreneurs of the world, because they had equality, they had more equality in their community. They were the beginning of the cooperative movement in the southwest of England. They paid out for people that got injured. So so much if you lost an eye, a leg, and so on, but it was very fair. They had real representation. So they had Black female pirates leading their charge. He uses this story of pirates to say how we can build communities and organizations of purpose. It's really fun. And there's a good follow-up book to it as well. So that's Be More Pirate.
Sounds like pirate propaganda.
Yeah, possibly. He did a great book launch as well, Charlotte. You'd love it. He got Penguin published the book, so that wasn't very piratey. But what he did was that he put a massive bright pink billboard up on the Penguin head office the night before it was published, without them knowing it, advertising the book. And they came out and said, "What's this? You can't do this." And it was like, "It's your book."
I love that. Mine's obvious. It's the purpose myth, and it's about what I believe is the lie that your 9-to-5 job must fulfill your life's purpose.
Tom, do you want to share your book choice and why you chose it?
Thank you. It's called Beginners, The Joy and Transformative Power of Lifelong Learning. And this is a fellow by the name of Tom Vanderbilt. And truth be told, I haven't flipped through the whole thing yet, but there are bits that I quite enjoy. He basically poses the question of, why do we stop learning as adults? And he talks about it through the prism of becoming a new father. And his analogy is that as a parent, you don't know how to do this. You're a beginner in that. And it's basically a celebration of dilettantism, just trying any number of different new things and sort of experiencing that rush of singing in a choir for the first time, going snowboarding for the first time, et cetera, just, to keep on learning and to keep exploring. So I thought that was apt for our discussion.
Stace, your book that you chose on purpose?
I chose Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. I think like many of us, when I look back on my childhood, I think about all the creative things that I used to do. I used to paint cubism, played saxophone at the Queen Elizabeth Hall in London, was a county netball player and a public speaker. And then all of those things slowly went into the shadows as I pursued a decade in intense investment and asset management jobs. So the last few years, I've been on a real journey to introduce more creativity back into my everyday life. And that's exactly what Elizabeth tells you to do in such a beautiful way in Big Magic. So that's my recommendation.
I also chose a book which is by the people who run 80,000 Hours. So Ben, actually, I think that I've read your copy, which I still have, so apologies for keeping your book.
Bigger impact in your hands, Skye.
I did read it. So 80,000 Hours is the book title by a guy called Benjamin Todd. And if you don't know 80,000 Hours and you're interested in purpose in work and having an impact through work, you should check them out. It was a really challenging book for me because it challenged everything that I thought really about impact and work and how to have the greatest impact through your work. So one of the things that they talk a lot about in that book is, where can you have the greatest impact in work? Is it through working in admin at a charity, or is it being an investment banker who earns £500,000 but donating 70% of your income directly to problem solving? And I'd never really thought about it before in those terms, being a purpose, sort of self-righteous purpose person historically. So it was really challenging for me, but really interesting. And this idea that If you are interested in getting into purpose or doing anything, you can do that today with whatever you have and in small ways, and then thinking about where you should put your time to have the most impact. So that's my book, and I do recommend you check it out. So we're going to be having the giveaway on Instagram, I believe, and we'll be sending it out. So if you follow Escape the City on @EskTheCity, we will be doing that, and we'll be sending out all of these wonderful books. We've all got a lot of time. A lot of us have a lot of time, and we can't go anywhere. So it's a good thing to do and find out what you think, what your perspective on purpose is, and which definition is right for you in your own life too.
Great, thank you, Skies. Right, we've got some interesting questions from the audience tonight. First one is, what would you say about dealing with the fear of change to finding more purpose? Any thoughts on that? How to deal with the fear of change whilst you're moving your life towards something more purposeful?
I think from a psychological perspective, I would just invite you to dig into what exactly is the root of the fear of change, because I think fear of change feels like a very broad and almost like an easy excuse because we're all scared of change. But I think digging into what exactly is it that you're scared of? What do you anticipate changing? Why would that be so bad? What's so scary about that? So maybe just sitting down and journaling about what you anticipate will happen when things change and exploring why that might be so bad. Because I think the further you dig, the closer you'll get to something that is probably really meaningful and important to you and might even be closer to your purpose than what you originally think you'll be discovering.
I guess it also depends on what you're giving up.
Yeah.
What's the risk? What's your station in life? Do you have responsibilities for family, et cetera, et cetera? So a lot of factors to take in there.
I think understanding what you're afraid of, what is it that you're risking, what actually is the fear. There's that fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of et cetera, et cetera. And one thing that I talk about a lot, so anybody who's seen me talk a lot will just think, Skye, this is the only thing that she knows. But I love Tim Ferriss's fear setting exercise, where you don't define your goals, but you think about your fears instead. And think about what they are and what's the likelihood it would happen and what would you do if that happened and how can you prevent it. And basically it's a plan. If you plan to fail, then if you fail, it doesn't matter because you already have a plan and therefore it's not so scary. I think it's the unknown quantity which makes fear difficult. But if you feel you have a game plan, it makes it a lot easier to manage. So he's got a TED Talk. You can watch it. He's got a template. I find that really helpful for myself as a planner and somebody who probably always imagines the worst case scenario.
Next question. So, employers or managers mindset, any advice or thoughts on how you go about helping people in your team think about their purpose?
You have to ask them. What turns your crank? What do you want to be when you grow up? I mean, to me, it's dialogue. Just have to find out, okay, this is the job. This is what you're doing. Great. How are you leveraging this career path? Where do you end up seeing yourself? And it always comes back to that mantra of mine that says, all I've got to offer you is the work. And if you want to expand your horizons and do more, and if you're ready to fail, that's fine. We'll let you fail, but we'll learn from it. So tell me what you want to do. Ideally, it's take over from me.
Okay, next question is a question for all the panelists. What was your aha moment, if there was one, that sparked your initial shift to a more purpose-driven life, whether in your career or life in general?
I challenge most people who say they have a aha moment because I don't think there's such a thing. I haven't experienced and I haven't really seen it, where there's like a thunderbolt, a sort of road to Damascus, if that's the right Bible story. Skye opens and it's like it's you, National Lottery style. But I think when we look backwards again, join the dots, we go, oh yeah, that was the moment it turned. I told you the story at the beginning about being in the queue at the beer and pizza night at university, but that wasn't an aha moment. It was just a sliding door. For me, it's about moments of clarity where I get moments of, that's interesting. And then it's about your habits around that. So then it's the purpose, myth, skills, and the purpose journaling or whatever label you want to give it. It's going, how do I take that on board? And for me, I'm not very good at the journaling stuff. I'm not very good at the worst case scenario planning. Skye does that, thankfully. But what I'm good at is picking up the phone or messaging someone or tweeting someone, say, hey, this is interesting. Did you see that? Or that really sparked an insight. And I guess this is what we practice at Rebel Book Club. But this is my default behavior is, oh, that's interesting. And then it becomes more than a thought. It becomes something shared. And then the real trick that I found is that you go, in that moment, you turn it into a question. So going back to that Teams question, we go, wouldn't it be wonderful if, wouldn't it be great if, rather than going, oh, that pisses me off, or that's a problem, it's like, wouldn't it be great if, a reframe, and this is the annoying optimist approach, but wouldn't it be great if we did it differently, or we tried that this time, and who knows quite what it's going to work out, but let's explore it. And then if you can get one or two or three others to say, yeah, sure, let's give it a go, then something interesting may happen. So curiosity plus when you get a moment of clarity or a little insight or a little bubble, and we always get them, and working out what the stimulant is. So are you out running? Are you in the shower? Are you listening to certain music? Are you reading Charlotte's book? Are you discovering the latest beak? Or which escape story is inspiring you? Where are these moments where you get these, I feel it and something clicks, and then you've got to grab it, and it's getting hold of it that's important, and it's working out what the tactic is that works for you. You've got to get hold of them, otherwise they disappear. It's hard when you're out running and that happens.
Any different views from the panel? Does anyone feel like they did have an aha moment?
I didn't have an aha moment. As I said, I've always been a self-righteous purpose person my whole life who wanted to save the world, but I was on a different path. And where did purpose come from me is actually from death. So my brother was killed in an avalanche 14 years ago. And for me, that was obviously a big wake-up call, a big thing around the fragility of life. And it goes back to the meaning making. For me, is obviously that was a very traumatic experience that is very painful and still is painful to this day, but it was finding meaning in that of how can I live for two? You do things that are better because somebody isn't able to live their life. It's a lot more morbid than Ben's curiosities and looking for inspiration, but for me, it's making something that was very painful, meaningful, has brought a lot of purpose to my life and how I approach life and how I approach every day and what impacts me and what doesn't impact me, because I can go back to this purpose of I have to live a life that's true to myself and not stay places where I'm unhappy and not do things that make me unhappy, because I only have one life and I don't know how long it is. We find these sorts of moments all over the place, but for me, that's been very powerful, and I see that in a lot of other people as well.
Just to add to having worked with you, Skye, you're particularly good at letting the bullshit go. It doesn't mean you don't care, but when something is not relevant to why we're here, how this really impacts the person, the business, what we're trying to achieve, it's gone. Whereas I think a lot of people, we can hold on to the bullshit and that can eat away.
Definitely.
The aha moment. Well, I was in Africa looking directly into the eyes of a chimpanzee. That wasn't an aha moment. I got this close to mountain gorillas in the DRC. Wasn't an aha moment. I kind of loathingly, I agree with Ben that it didn't sort of happen with a thunderbolt. It was sort of a series of progressions. And it was really about the application of corporate business communications background into this sector, because this sector is a little bit, we have to talk and think like business people if we're going to make that change. And we need to be able to be accessible to the grassroots out there. So I think the challenge that our sector faces is translating what we're trying to do into readily accessible language in a way that's relevant and not so self-righteous. And it's been just a series of little progressions that kind of look at that translation from corporate into this sector.
I'm going to ask Laura's question now. How do you make sure you stay aligned with your purpose? I feel like the world around us is changing at such a fast pace. It can be difficult to stay aligned with our work and our projects. So any thoughts or tips on how to stay aligned with our purpose when the world around us is changing so quickly?
I find this really difficult, so I'm probably not the right person to answer it, but no one else was answering it. It's really challenging because I think if you are curious and you notice things that are kind of in your side mirror or things that break your heart, things that intrigue you, then it's very easy to get pulled in a million different directions. So one very practical, simple thing that I use is if I have a project or something that I really want to focus on, I make sure that there's some sort of accountability partner, like someone that I cannot let down. And it's not just a friend that I say, oh, I'm going to do this thing, please make sure you keep me accountable. It will be something like, booking a one-way ticket somewhere. For example, once we decided to open Crack and Cider, which was a shop where you could buy essential items for the homeless, the day that we made an agreement with the shop owner to do that on a particular date was the day that I could never look back or veer off the path of following through on that purposeful action, because there was someone else that was reliant on me following through on it. I think when we have those goals, thinking about the point of no return, how can you get to the point of no return as quickly as possible to make sure that those other things that seem interesting don't sway you off path?
100%. And I remember I used to really annoy people at the escape school. We'd have 30 or 40 of us in the startup program. And then we'd be like, right now, these ideas and plans we've been doing for 2 weeks, this weekend, you're going to put a version of this out, even if it's just a landing page, you're going to share it, you're going to announce it, you're going to do a pop-up store, you're going to just try it. Easy if you've come up with the idea the day before. If you've been thinking about this for months, if you're a reputation concerned person, really hard, because you put so much pressure on this thing. Too many of your hopes and dreams are on it. And so what I would do in that situation to annoy people would be the person who was really resisting doing anything, I would go and make it for them. And usually a lot of the tactics was to, can I host an event just to bring people together and try and get excited? So I'd launch an event for them online and then publish it and share it with people and say, by the way, I know you've paid me not to do this, but this is what I'm going to do. So that's an extreme end of accountability, is to pay a coach to force you to do it, but you still at some point have to take over from that. I think the sort of philosophical version of what Charlotte's just said, which I always go back to, and we had this on our wedding day because we love it so much, is that if you want to go fast, you go alone. I mean, if you want to go far, you go together. And that's a Mozambican proverb. And it really always keeps coming back to me whenever I'm getting stuck. So Laura, I think it's really, really hard to make these transitions, and I'm positively distracted all the time. And I really want to fix, like Skye and many others I'm sure listening in tonight, want to fix some of the big problems in the world or play an important part in that. And so I find it really hard on the focus side, but the accountability is what brings it back. So I'm lucky I have the family, very grounded around that, but also partners, people to collaborate with. And on partnerships, the thing that I've learned over 20 years, having 3 or 4 close business and partnerships, is that test them. It's like a relationship. Skye used to say in our classes, don't get married on your first date, to your business partner. Go slowly, see how it goes, and go back to the people that you're building trust with and you really enjoy spending time with, and that you have skills that aren't all the same. If you're different in some ways, that really helps the diversity of the partnership. So accountability, and find people that you can enjoy hanging out with, and you'll find the transitions, the fears and everything else a lot easier.
I think tonight has been such an example to me of how important it's been to stay connected to the escape community and the ecosystem, and believing in the concept that you are the average of who you spend the most time with. So thinking about who you share this experience with, and the relationships that you nurture to keep you on that purposeful path. And on that note, we are 100 strong this evening of people who are obviously interested in living a purposeful life. So let's continue to connect with each other. So perhaps whilst we answer the last question, if you would like to drop in the chat your LinkedIn links or any social handles, so we can share those after the session and you can continue the conversations together. One of the last questions, or we've got 2 questions related to the kind of financial reality of living a purposeful life. What would you say about the desire to work more directly with the public in a caring capacity in your full-time role, but the reality of the financial sacrifice that comes with this, and being able to financially independent or one day stop renting being important to you? And then secondly, how can I keep my financial stability whilst changing my professional orientation? Any thoughts on that?
Can you build up a war chest to basically try and save up and then give it a go? Is that possible? I remember when we moved to Hong Kong with a couple of suitcases and no jobs, but we socked away a little bit of money just in case things didn't work out, and the ability to come back home. So that was just my personal experiences. Try and get a little bit of a war chest together before you go off.
I agree with that. Or do it on the side and think of it less of a one stops and the other begins, and more of a crisscross. And how can you slowly peter one out and then start doing another? Or something that I've done with most of my career is that I'll have extended stints of consulting and doing strategy work, and then I'll take 3 to 6 months off to work on something that's purposeful, and then I'll go back to strategy consulting for 6 months, a year, 2 years. That's how I'm able to do both, but there are so many different ways around it.
We have the concept escape of intelligent transition, not putting pressure on your projects or your purpose-driven work from a financial perspective before you need to. So building up an escape fund whilst you're still earning in other ways, or how you can test whether your ideas or your purpose-driven projects are going to financially sustain you before they need to, or budgeting like you're living on a lower salary whilst you're still earning a higher amount, just to test to see if you can do it and how it makes you feel. Seeing it as the crisscross journey is a lovely idea. I really like that. So with a few minutes left to spare, this has been such an awesome conversation. Thank you all for joining and listening in, the panelists for being here. Perhaps I can put the four of you on the spot to give or share one takeaway that you would like all of our audience to take away from the conversation this evening. Let's go reverse from what we did at the start of the night. So Skye, if I can start with you.
The most important thing to me in all of this is to find out what actually matters to you, what your definition of success actually looks like, not what my definition of success looks like or what anybody else is saying, and really holding that very close and protecting that, because the world is going to always say you should care about this, you should care about that. If you can say this is what I really care about, and every day thinking about how I can do a little bit more of that or incorporate that a bit more, that's the number one thing. Figure out what that means to you and then hold that really close, and that will help you to make the right decisions along the way. So that's my...
Sorry, just another thing, how people can reach you or find out more about what Escape does.
Well, me personally, I'm really bad at email, so don't email me if you ever want to hear from me. But escapethecity.org, join. We're going to be doing lots of things. LinkedIn is probably the best way to get in touch with me. I'll pop my thing in there. But yeah, we're going to be doing lots of interesting stuff, and we're trying to have more events where people can get involved with each other and have chats. Keep in touch.
Charlotte, one takeaway and how people can buy your book.
Mm-hmm. My one takeaway is think about the ratio of how much time you spend consuming versus creating, and maybe create more than you consume. It's been really helpful to me. And how you can buy my book on Amazon, The Purpose Myth, and get in touch with me through my website. It's charlottecramer.com. And then you can find your favorite mode to get in touch with me.
Thank you. Tom?
That's a tough one. I mean, it's kind of echoing what Skye said. Don't feel boxed in by other people's interpretation of purpose. Look at how you define purpose and why you do the things you do. And I guess the cynic in me says, if purpose is an industry, it should become obsolescent, ultimately. It's just the kind of thing that we're perpetuating ourselves, and basically we need to ensure that we all become extinct at some point, in a good way.
And how can we reach you, Tom?
Tom.Poldre on LinkedIn.
Cool, we will share that. Last but not least.
So many thoughts from tonight. One big picture thought, one small. So the big picture thought is the looking backwards. So not just join the dots, but like deathbed. So we're seeing a lot of these harrowing stories right now of people in ICU getting very sick very quickly and losing their lives. So imagine that's you. What are you going to look back on and say, that was great? I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I didn't waste time doing that. And you can't apply that mindset to every decision in life. That's too much. It's overwhelming. You'd be exhausted. You'd be reaching your deathbed too fast. But it's really thinking about, okay, when it comes to these fears, when it comes to these itches I really want to scratch, when it comes to these things I get excited about because I read about these people or what they're doing, and I'm like, I want some of that. I want to be at their party. What did you do? What did you do in that moment? Yes, buy the books. Yes, read the reading. And I'm a big supporter of that. But more than that, start conversations and then commit to something. And on the small stuff, really start it with asking better questions. So reaching out to people, you've asked great questions tonight. Now go and ask some more questions that are on your mind to other people. For all of us that have got to this point with exploring this and care about this, like we do this because we're curious about how can we play a part? What can we do? How can we make things better? And so if you keep showing that curiosity and actually asking those questions, you'll have great conversations and they can lead to all sorts of things. So yeah, just ask questions.
Well, I guess that wraps up a fascinating conversation. Thank you all so much for joining us, and panelists for being here. I hope everybody can find the capacity to go and discover some curiosities and those small actions and notice things every day that bring more purpose in your work and outside of your work too. Take care, everyone, and please do stay in touch with Escape going forward. Have a lovely rest of your evening.
Good job, Stacey.
Thank you, Stacey, from your bathroom in Lisbon.
It's the living room, everybody.